Welcome everybody for coming for this rather early morning, I would say, session. So we have three people who see the question of collective violence driven by faith from three different vantage points. Not only violence, Ziya's work is more about political disenfranchisement, etc. So we'll get to that thing. Ziya Salam reflects what it means to be a Muslim in India today. He is a practicing Muslim and a keen observer of Indian society and politics. His most recent book is actually a running commentary of how he sees an India that is taking shape as we speak. Revati Laul is not merely a journalist who dwells deep into the question of communal violence. She is showing a mirror to those who think of themselves as enlightened people. Condemning violence and violent people is an easy thing, but understanding them is a more difficult challenge, and she has sought to undertake that, and that is what her work that we'll discuss today. Arjun Appadurai offers as a theory of understanding of all this through his decades of work, why people turn against other people, what motivates them, and he also makes this rather unsettling thought that the distance from what we think of as any nationalism to ethnic violence may not be as far or as distant as we might actually want to think of it. So in the next few minutes, we shall explore how the work of these three panelists are linked and help us make sense of our past and the present. On that note, I'll start with Ziya. What does it mean to be a Muslim in India today?
Thank you, Varghese, and thank you everybody for coming in so early in the day. And I guess that is probably the only happy note I have to share. Being Muslim and Hindu India today, and by the grace of God, we can exclude places like Tamil Nadu and Kerala when I talk of this. Being Muslim and Hindu India today means not just being marginalized, not just being scrutinized for every action of yours, but being besieged 24/7. Your food habits are questioned. Your ways of dressing are questioned. Your language is marginalized. Your hijab is lampooned, scoffed at. Your places of worship are attacked. Your places of learning are not spared. It seems when one walks on the roads of India in certain parts of the country, your life is in danger. You leave your home in the morning, you are not very sure if you'll come back safely in the evening or if you'll come back to a happy family. I'm not trying to scare anybody, but that's the reality of living in a place like Delhi, UP, in certain parts of Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Haryana, and so on. Fortunately, this side of the Vindhyas is a different story altogether.
Well, we'll keep that as a thought. We will explore these questions that Ziya raised in the next few minutes. I'll go to Revati. So Revati has done a work which essentially what she's done is she explored the life of three people who are actually part of the mob. Mob is an abstract, but mob is always made of individual people. So who are those individual people? We usually don't get to see them. We don't get to know them. It's pretty much easy to condemn them as uneducated, uncivilized, violent people, which is, we are insulated from that thought. That comfort zone is being breached by Revati's work. So Revati goes to Gujarat and spends no less than a decade of time meeting and interacting with three people who actually went on a rampage in 2002, looking for victims, looking for the other, including some of their close friends, if I recall correctly. So who are those three people and how did you get to know them? Can you tell us briefly, what did you find, how did you find them?
Thanks, Varghese. Am I audible to everyone? So my book, The Anatomy of Hate, actually was born out of one question. why is this politics of hate that is now mainstream, why was it so attractive? And we all know that in the year 2002, there was a pogrom against Muslims in at least 18 districts of Gujarat. So, as a journalist, I was more interested in why this hate was so attractive. So, I decided to ask that question through the telling of the stories of people who formed part of these pogroms. And I'm going to describe the three of them to you. The first was someone who actually caused me to change my entire perspective on these fault lines of hate. He's someone who in the year 2002 was a student, was doing a master's in a liberal arts degree, could speak English, was from a dominant caste. And when the pogrom started, some members of these mobs came to his college campus, to his hostel rooms, and they said, you know, on this day, we are going to loot this particular shop because it's owned by a Muslim and it's a shoe shop, and you can come and loot shoes, and you will have this window of opportunity from this hour to this hour. After that, you better scram because then the cops will come. So his friends were all very excited to take part in this. Now he said, I'm upper caste, I don't need stolen shoes, but I didn't want to miss out on the action. I didn't want to miss out on what was going on there. So I went along with my friends. And when he told me this story, he said at that point of time, Gujarat was cut into two halves. The half that was out cutting and killing, and the half that was out celebrating. And I was with the half that was celebrating. After he went there, saw this, took part in all of this, and a few months later, the action died down, and his degree finished. And since he finished his master's degree in liberal arts, he was looking for a job. And in the early 2000s in Gujarat, if you didn't do an MBA, didn't do law, didn't do medicine, engineering, one of those losers like me who studied the liberal arts, then the best place to get a job with a middle class salary was in the NGO sector, because there had been an earthquake the year before, and a lot of the big fat international NGOs like Oxfam etc. had come to Gujarat. So after cheering on for the death and destruction of Muslims, this man got a job in rehabilitating them, because that's what NGOs were doing that year. So he was continued to curse them, and while cursing them, he continued to mete out relief and rehabilitation. But he had no real interaction with Muslims before this. And a lot of people who grow up with these myths that Muslims are the people who walk, who write backwards, who are jihadis, who keep goats and then slay them, so they're born with violence. All of these ideas started to fall apart because he was actually interacting with real Muslims instead of the fantasies he'd grown up on. And that disturbed him, because he also met, amongst other people, Bilkis Bano. And he met a lot of people who had been, he saw a man cry for the first time. He met women who had been raped. He met people, children who had, people who'd lost their children. And it shook him up. So he said, am I the satanic person for wanting these people dead? And he couldn't look at his face in the mirror. He couldn't sleep at night. And after a few months of going through this, he slowly started to unravel. By the time I met him, he is someone who was the most interesting person I have met in my life. He is someone who went from being a fanatic to a left liberal atheist. And when I met him, I said, how can this happen? I have not understood the first thing about hate. If I think of it as a fixed thing, then I, as a journalist, as a media person, as a storyteller, I'm also fixing it. I'm giving it a frozen space, and I'm not allowing people to have a catharsis, a meltdown, a change of heart. Because this man was in the company of no one and nothing else around him to understand that it's possible to change. Luckily for him, his NGO had recruited him precisely for this reason. They recruited radical hardline people to work with them and change them. That is when I felt that hate needed to be understood. But he was not the only person I met. The other person then in my book, I followed this man for 10 years till he allowed me to tell his story. 10 years of chasing down one person. Then the second person in my book was someone who raped Muslim women and children, and he confessed later to another journalist saying, I raped Muslim women till they were pulverized to pickle. And he said this while being married to a Muslim woman. Now the fact that he bragged about this in public was one very important part of my story, because it told me that this man, Suresh Jadeja, who had cut and raped and killed Muslim women and children during the 2002 pogrom in Gujarat, why was he bragging about this? Who was his audience? If he brags about this, he has an audience, and his audience is the people he's doing this for, because this politics is a performance. So if he is performing this act, then Suresh is not an individual. He needs to be understood as a composite of you and I and all the people here who think that because we're in Chennai, we are not holding up this factory of hate, but we are. You know, there's a banality, the everyday actions. What ads are we showing behind our heads? Who are the sponsors? Who are the sponsors of this whole orgy of hate that we play out each day? Every one of us is playing a part. And Suresh's story is disturbing because it's the extreme end of something where we are all playing in that orchestra in some way or the other. So telling his story was not just about that individual, it was about this composite. And he was married to a Muslim woman, but she was his first victim. That's too long, it's too long drawn out to go into that story.
Yeah, we will get to that thing. So just note that point that one of these characters in Revati's book, he had a Muslim wife.
This is what I'm talking about, Suresh.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You mentioned that point. Just keep that, not that point. We'll come back to that point.
Yes.
I'll go to Arjun Appadurai.
And then the third character is someone who swung between these two. He came from a Bhil tribe, and he was someone who was unlike the rest of his family, who had only gone to class, dropped out after class 2 or 3. He is someone who from his village pushed himself to go to school, go to college, and after that ended up back as daily wage labor. And he also had, like many tribals, are made to feel insignificant, inconsequential, that his father was an alcoholic. He thought it had something to do with him being tribal. So he hated himself, he hated his community, he hated his own identity. He had all these questions about who am I? Am I this not so, do I come from the wrong kind of background? So he tried to gloss over his tribalness, he tried to get another kind of caste certificate for himself. And along came the Sangh Parivar. And because he could sing, he became part of their bhajan mandalis, and then he joined the VHP. And then he started to get recognized, he started to get power, he started to get money, he started to get contracts. His life changed completely. During the 2002 pogrom, he burnt houses of Muslims. But because he was the middle of these two extreme characters that I've described in my book, he underwent some guilt, he went through nightmares, but he continues to swing between wanting to perform this politics of hate in order to get the power and recognition that he so badly needed and wasn't getting from anywhere else despite education, and feeling bad about it and reconstructing these houses, but mostly to be able to get the cases off his back. So through him, I asked this other question. If we want people to not subscribe to this politics of hate, what are we offering them on the other side?
Right.
We're saying, oh, go get an education. He got an education. It didn't do anything for him. I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So this is 2002 Gujarat that we heard. Now you go another 10 years back into history. 1992 Mumbai is where Arjun Appadurai's research, and then he began trying to explain or try to find a reason why people are turning against other people. So one of the points that you make in your work, Professor, is that any kind of collective identity actually tries to claim some kind of exceptionalism, and from that point to a claim of ethnic purity, and then purge and violence, that can be a very quick slide. Could you just explain in terms of, in the context of the research that you have done?
Thanks very much. I hope I can be heard. Thanks, Varghese, and thanks to my fellow panelists, Ziya and Revati, whose work of all three of them is very rich and both gives certain approaches but also opens questions which I think are vital. I have had a longish academic and personal story connected to India, so I've been thinking about many of these things for a long time. So I will address only this specific part of Varghese's question, which is that one of the basic questions of all social science, and it's very close to where the rubber hits the road, is what is the we-they equation? Can you ever have a we without a they? And if people by and large are, let's say, mixed or living in a kind of taken for granted identity, to make we and they is a very laborious thing. And the only way to make we, unfortunately, is to have a they. And many social scientists are still thinking about this kind of sociology or anthropology 1A question. Why can we not just have a we? Why does the they arise? Now, I won't go largely into that, but that question leads to a kind of somewhat exclusionary basis for all collective identities. Men without women, so women must be somehow put somewhere so that men can be men, and on it goes, every single identity. And one of those, and I'll leave it here, is what we think of as national identity. So I am of the view, which is I'm not alone in, that all our problems start with the root question of nationalism. Who is the national we? And I've written ad nauseum, I would say, for many of my readers, that nation is artificial. I don't mean this nation, that nation, all nations. The whole form is 300 years old, artificial, remote. I mean, why does it become something people want to kill and die for? It's very puzzling. It's a puzzle I'm still struggling with. But once it happens, we have to create days at the national level, and that is true in India and so on. The big question becomes, why has that become a growing trend these days? But I'm saying the germ of making others whom we want to push out
we had the sad spectacle of another union minister going to the house of Akhlaq in Dadri. Now, Akhlaq was probably the best publicized case of lynching ever since Modi took over. The incident took place on September 28, 2015. So one of the men accused of Akhlaq's lynching, Ravin Sisodia, he died in police custody, and his family refused to carry out the cremation, accusing the police of murdering him. Now, our union minister goes to the house of Ravin Sisodia. He offers sympathy, condolences, then he wraps up the body of Ravin Sisodia in our beloved tricolor. What was the message he was trying to send? The tricolor is used to wrap the body of a soldier who has died on the frontier against Pakistan or China, not for a murder accused who has lynched a fellow Indian citizen. For the first time, we had a union minister wrapping the tricolor on a murder accused just because the person he had killed was a Muslim. That is a change we have seen after 2014.
Right. So, Professor, so the violence for camera, this is something that you have written about. So the spectacle, it's a sacrifice for the nation, if I recall what you're saying. So how does media work in creating this imagination, and why particularly this individual act of violence? This is again nothing really particular to Indian situation. You have cited in your work the Islamic State in Iraq and Mosul, etc. Can you just explain the role of media, and particularly the digital media and this WhatsApp forwards?
I can try. It's a very big and very important question, and it has a number of aspects, but I will certainly say media is now intimately wrapped up with all these performances, to use Revati's phrase. It is not just reporting, recording, archiving, it is co-producing. And among the many reasons we could adduce for this, one is another mystery. Why does bad news always move faster and more credibly than good news? If I say somebody did a good thing, can we sell the Hindu on the basis of that? No. So it's a struggle to avoid the speed and attractiveness of bad news. That's another factor. But most salient, I think, in our digital era, and in this regard, India is deep in the digital era in spite of digital inequality, and that is basically because of mobile telephony. We know this. The consequence is that for all kinds of activities, and we usually stress the positive ones, retail, pay to M, this, that, all very nice. But in this area that Ziya just spoke about, I would say the consequence of social media, especially its visually mediated aspect, not only means people have become journalists of their own lives, but also that media is a primary form of community. So the idea, the fact that you are just beaming out, you know somebody is listening, and a kind of ersatz community is created. I'll go one step further. Until you document, display and share, the thing feels less than real. The fact that you just lynched somebody on the spot is less real than the circulated video document. So that is a horrifying puzzle, and it is something that is not media in the conventional sense, news media, etc. It is mediation. All digital mediation has brought us to this pass. So there may be many good things about it, but we cannot not look this fact in the face, that mediated violence feels like the only guarantee of the reality of the violence that you perpetrated. You're not running away from it. You want it so that you are convinced that you actually did it. And others will say, yeah, you did it. Anyway.
Right. Revati, Suresh is the character who has had a Muslim wife, right? So the reason why Suresh marries a Muslim, the background to that is that his sister was married to, or a Muslim married his sister. Can you go a little deep into how that happened?
Yes. To come back to why someone carried out acts of hate against Muslims while being married to one. The personal history always is interesting to understand why we well up with hate, why I might have more hate than Ziya or Varghese or Arjun. So Suresh's story was interesting for that reason. And when he was a child, he had polio. So he had one bad leg. So he was made fun of. And because he was made fun of, his father decided to, there was a tradition in his tribe. He comes from a denotified criminal tribe called the Charas. And these are people who are punished for belonging to a particular tribe by the British, by the law. They were penalized for belonging to a particular tribe because the British felt that all these various tribes were passing on information to the revolutionaries in 1857, and they were scared that they would be upstaged by them. So they confined them to these little criminal barracks, and even after India became independent, for 6 years we forgot about these tribes. So many of them then took to criminal activities because they were denied access to education, sanitation, other facilities, and their normal movement which guaranteed their trade was stopped. So Suresh comes from this sort of community. In addition, so in this community, when he had a bad leg, his father believed that if you trap a pigeon and you kill the pigeon and you smear the fresh blood of the pigeon on the atrophied muscle, which is a polio-ridden leg, then it can kind of have these healing properties. So he trapped this pigeon, and when he went to retrieve it from the well, he slipped and fell, and his own leg sort of, the flesh peeled off, and he started to curse his son, and he said, "Who is this son? This fucking boy who's not even mine. This whore of a wife has gone and screwed someone, and I've dumped with this animal." So he talked like that always in front of Suresh when he was drunk. So Suresh's primary experiences of any kind of emotion is violence and self-disregard of the highest order. When you do that to a child, what do you think is going on inside the head of this child? So that's his starting point. So he grows up feeling self-loathing. He starts to throw stones at his teacher. He gets thrown out of school. He starts to become the gunda in his area, and that gundaism is used by people to settle scores with each other. If you come from the same nomadic tribe and I come from the same nomadic tribe and I have rented my house out to you, but you're not clearing out and you're not paying the rent, I can't go to the cops because in the eyes of the cops we're all criminals. So you go to Suresh and Suresh will beat you up and break your legs in order to get that rent deed done. So Suresh started using his anger in this way to play a local Robin Hood role. Then the Sangh started working on him because they look for people like this. They started to work on him, and while the Sangh was telling him Muslims are bad, this kind of fake history that they were giving him, his sister went and eloped with a Muslim man. So he felt doubly injured. So he said, they have taken one, meaning the Muslims have taken one from my family, I am going to take one of theirs. And so he set about seducing a Muslim woman in order to pay back. But what is he doing? What is this payback? It's punishment to himself because he's agreeing to marry the enemy. So he's still in a world of self-loathing. The
Right.
self-loathing is a very, very important part of the emotional cycle of this man, who then goes on the 28th of February 2002 to go out on a rampage. He starts the day by raping Muslim women, coming back, putting a tilak on his Muslim wife, saying, I don't want you to get killed. Then he goes out and rapes more Muslim women, then he comes back and makes love to his wife, or whatever phrase you want to use for what he did to her that evening, and then goes out and kills more people.
So here is a very typical case of interfaith marriage. So Professor, you talk about in your work about the attempts to ensure that community boundaries are reinforced. And one reason why this doubt about the identity of the community is that these boundaries are become porous. And one way in this the boundaries become porous is interfaith marriages, migrations, movement of people, communication, etc. And can you just explain this idea of uncertainty, the end of certainty, which is one ingredient, one contributor to mass violence?
Yes, Varghese, thank you. And it follows very naturally from what we have heard both from Ziya and from Revati. For a long time, early on, I suggested that ethnic violence, extreme ethnic violence, is a product not of certainty. You are me, let me kill you, but uncertainty. Who am I? Who are you? And the only way to achieve certainty is actually literally vivisectionally, by opening you up. Because I don't want to open myself up because I will be gone, but I would if I could. But the more general point is that we, for centuries now, all over the world, we have mixture. People are mixed. So when somebody says to you, Eric Hobsbawm pointed this long ago, that in the early 90s in ex-Yugoslavia, when Yugoslavia was breaking up, there were 1.2 million marriages between Serbs and Croats. But you have to suddenly say, are you Serb or Croat? In other words, you have to violently excise one identity from your body. So the point there, our dear senior colleague Ashish Nandi long ago wrote a book called The Intimate Enemy. So the point is, the enemy is already inside you once these categories get frozen. How do you excise it? Surgically. So you can take it out from yourself, you can take it out in and through your wife, you can take it out through your neighbors. This is a story all over the world. People have been friends for 100 years next door to each other, suddenly they're enemies. So that fact of mixture has to be violently undone. So that is what I think this purity, cleansing, and exorcism has to do with ethnic violence.
So the laws that are being made to prevent interfaith marriages can be understood from this
sorry.
context. There are several states have made legal restrictions against interfaith marriages.
Yeah, so let us say that the modern state as well as other modern apparatus for various reasons need to fix things. And the colonial period notoriously said you are this, you are not that, you are upper caste, lower caste. Whereas things before were, of course there was hierarchy, there was caste, but there was some fluidity. And life and death did not depend on what answer you give. It could be a simple local answer, it could be a big answer. Once that rigidity sets in, next step is mixture is a problem. But mixture is already there. So you have to undo the mixture. So certainly there is some relationship between what the big apparatuses of power need, which is stability, fixity, order. This is going on now with the CIA, with the CAA, the recent laws are part of the incomplete effort. That effort never works. You say you are this, you are not that. So you have to keep having new laws. We will say whether if you are in Bihar, if you are in Bangladesh, you are like this. If you are in Assam, it's an endless job. And the question is, where do you do it tomorrow, day after, etc. And in every case, you encounter a history of mixture and blending. So brutality follows because the state is telling you, sorry, not possible.
Right. So we've been speaking about how nationalism needs a kind of a homogenizing jacket which and fit other things into that. Now, resistance to that or sub-nationalism, I'm just coming to Ziya on the question of Muslim identity, that also pretty much requires a kind of neat homogenized identity of being a Muslim. That's a long history, but I'll very quickly jump to the current. So the current dispensation has addressed the Muslim community on two very vulnerable points, gender and caste. So this is in a way, critics of Hindutva have tried to sort of, even Indian nationalism have raised these 2 points to question the very viability of Indian nationalism, gender, caste particularly, and a kind of an inversion. The current dispensation say, okay, we are for Pasmanda Muslims, we are for Muslim women. How does that affect the Muslim outlook towards the Hindu nationalist project?
It's very interesting. See, as a Muslim, I don't think anybody buys that argument that the government has done anything for Muslim women, no matter what the talk is about instant triple talaq. I'll take you back in time. The triple talaq petitions started coming up in different courts across the country from 1980 onwards. And Narendra Modi and his government was nowhere on the horizon. And even in the latest case, all the petitioners were women and they were supported by Muslim Mahila Andolan. So it was the Supreme Court which invalidated instant triple talaq, and which was according to the letter and spirit of the Quran. It had nothing to do with the government of the day. It could have been the UPA or NDA. I'm sure that would have been immaterial. What is important is the law which the government made afterwards, after the Supreme Court had asked for a law on those lines to be made. The law is still full of loopholes. It goes against the concept of reconciliation, which is the hallmark of any marital arrangement. Any two partners can have their bad days or good days, but even Islam gives the two partners the opportunity to reconcile after a divorce. There is a period of 3 months which is called idda, during which the partners can speak to each other, or if nothing else, the man doesn't even take back his talaq. They can just resume cohabitation in bed, and the talaq is automatically annulled. The new law which has been framed by the parliament takes away that opportunity of reconciliation between partners. It makes talaq a crime for the Muslim community. And coming to the pasmanda issue, I'll ask you a very small cross question. Almost all the victims of lynching since September 28, 2015 to January 2024 have, barring Dalits of course, have been pasmanda Muslims. How many times has the government announced a compensation for them, a rehabilitation package for them, or even the Prime Minister, has he ever tweeted in any such case in support? Pasmanda Muslim talk and all the Sneh Yatra and everything is just glib talk.
So the rise of Hindutva, has it, I'm staying with you, Ziya, has it sort of anyway altered the Muslim self-perception of its own existence as a political community, not in the religious sense, as you say? Why I'm asking this question is that if you extend the court and Islamic law and how it interacts with how they both interact with the democratic system, we have this familiar argument. I would also want to ask your opinion on it, that the slide begins with the Shabanu, reversal of the Shabanu judgment.
Yeah.
So here, that what Parliament did was not going by the logic that you follow. It is because there was a group of Muslims who actually claimed the right to represent the community. Does that Muslim elite continue to represent Muslim community, or is there a kind of unraveling of that idea?
See, the Muslim elite, I don't think they have ever represented the community. We saw how certain Maulanas came out on the streets in the 80s in the Shah Bano case, and when the Rajiv Gandhi government, under pressure of clerics, decided to circumvent the judgment. What has gone unnoticed is, while Rajiv Gandhi was roundly criticized and Congress continues to be criticized for the Shah Bano verdict and what happened later on, what has gone unnoticed is how Allahabad High Court gave a judgment in 2021, gave a judgment in favor of an interfaith couple. There was an interfaith couple, and the court held that their marriage was legal, valid. How Chief Minister after Chief Minister of BJP ruled states, they have continued to circumvent the Allahabad High Court judgment and frame laws on the so-called premise of love jihad, which is nothing, just utter trash to avoid inter-community intermingling. There was a time in our history when people were not allowed to marry beyond their caste. Now this government doesn't want people to marry beyond their religion.
Right, again, Professor, the question is about ensuring and reinforcing the boundary. What should not be breached? I mean, if you see a lot of different manifestations, like for example, only the other day, you had an announcement about a regime of free movement of people across Indian and Myanmar border, which existed for a long time, at more than a decade, I would say. 16 kilometers people could walk in and out of both sides, which is going to be ended soon. So the tendency to seal the border, keep the community as a closed category, that is on the rise. Now you link this to census as one of the early moments of this process, the beginning of this process. I'll just very quickly recall an anecdote again from Gujarat. In one of the early census, this field enumerators reported that a lot of people are reporting in the column for religion that Hindu-Muslim, because they are unable to actually identify whether they are Hindus or Muslims. So the census commissioner says, no, this is not acceptable. They have to be either Hindu or Muslim, and then there is a whole debate, then it goes into that thing. So now, in your work on globalization, you say the boundaries get broken. Now, in a kind of pushback against globalization, the rise of nationalism or return of nationalism, have we come full circle to fluidity, or ensuring that fluidity is not allowed and boundaries are firm and sacred? Where are we standing at this moment?
So that's a very important question, and I would say in a way we have come back to making tight boundaries, etc. But actually it's an illusion, because globalization and all the things that it entails, both at the macro level and in very small areas within India, etc., it's a major force, has brought back the need for fixity, but in a new way. And the new way is this: that the entire global economy, global politics, global regulation, whether of viruses, arms, human bodies, trafficking, is all selective. You want this to cross the border, goods from Mexico, but migrants, no. And to my mind, if I may use a earthy phrase, no condom can be selective. To say, we will like that man, but not that man. We like that rifle because it's official trade, Mirage jets are coming, great. But if somebody brings a Sten gun from somewhere, not allowed. So that paradox is everywhere, including on human interaction. If you do this way, that is fine. You can leak, you can move across, you can do this. For example, just take simple migration. We know that in Kerala, for example, it's packed with workers from Bihar. Nobody is regulating that because it's part of the market process. And they are coming, they get jobs, the jobs go, the plantations are sold, they run back to Bihar. We know that story, and it's played out hundreds of times. But there are other movements, tightly regulated. Now the Northeast is the main site of that. Are you from Mizoram? Did you come from Burma? Are you a Myanmar this? Are you that? Suddenly the spotlight is there. So spotlight is not 100%, but it's going from here to there to there. Today's problem about boundaries, flows, leaks is globalization requires high selectivity, and nation state lacks that capacity. It can either open like the economy, koi bhi aao, FDI, chalo, or bilkul closed. You can't allow this, Kashmir will be locked down. See, both dynamics are going on. That I think is the change from, let's say, pre-British rule. You didn't have this massive tension between open and closed, like the valve is like this,
Revati, what your work is how it makes a significant deviation from reporting on communal violence is your attempt to actually see the perspective of the other side. You are actually entering into the world of the perpetrator and try to see how they see their own violence and the world. What did you see? The people who are on this side, the claimed self-certified liberals, how are they seen from that vantage point?
Utterly blind and failing, and that's the reason I wrote The Anatomy of Hate, because I wanted us to turn the lens on ourselves, or me to turn the lens on myself and use myself to actually hopefully open up these questions to all of us sitting here who imagine that we are not participants to the horrors that play out every day from Ayodhya to here. But we are all participants. Hannah Arendt wrote a century ago about the banality of evil. But when we look at it in our everyday lives today, what are we complicit in every single thing we say and do? Right from saying, oh, we don't subscribe to ultra-nationalism, but nationalism is okay. So would you allow an Eskimo to be the next Prime Minister of India? And if not, why not? Then identity breaks down into some sort of us and them, even for us. Those are questions we haven't asked ourselves. And since we became a republic, we have not asked ourselves the question, if power is something that the hard right uses to unite various disaggregated castes, from OBCs to Dalits to some Pashmanda Muslims, they're trying, in UP they're trying. If they're trying to hold this box and say, if you are only a Yadav or if you are only a Valmiki, then you are less powerful than if you are under the big Hindu umbrella. And if, like one of the characters in my book, derives real power, money, contracts from association with the Sangh, what would we want to happen on the other side? Are we creating collectives and cadres that allow people to derive power and social justice from forming polyfraternic fraternities? To say that if you associate with many castes and don't just live within your own caste society or building, then you will have more power? Are we providing mechanisms for that power to exist? The answer is a big fat no, and that's on us.
Right. Okay, so we have roughly 15 minutes to take questions from our very engaged listeners in this audience. Floor is now open. Here, sir. Yes. Do we have mics to go around? No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, panelists, for enlightening us on this very important topic in our country. As you can imagine, I think I will be speaking for many here, living in the relative comfort of South India, where we don't really perceive many of these things. And also, I mean, many of us also choose to live a very comfortable lives and not look at uncomfortable things. The question that arises for people like us is, what you speak of, how representative is it of the mainstream? Many of us get the feeling that surely all this exists, but surely not in the majority, surely in the fringes. Just like in the political spectrum, the extreme left and the extreme right get amplified, we get the impression that many of this is amplification of the minuscule rather than the majority, and I think it comes from our ignorance. So we would like you to enlighten us on this, please.
All right, okay. Who is your question addressed to? Anybody?
Yeah,
All right,
any
okay.
of the panelists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'll just add a small point further to that. So there is a geographical variation that all of you have discussed in your work. So whether this is representative, the question in 2019, 37% is a vote that national vote. On 37% national votes, the BJP gets 55% of Lok Sabha. Again, that is not a unique moment. If you look all in the barring, I think 96 and 98 elections, this disproportionality between the percentage voting and how that translates into Lok Sabha, that is significantly, I would say, alarming at many levels. So with that as an addition, whoever would want to take that question, whether this trend that we see, is it representative, is it national?
See, basically, as far as I see, what is happening to our country at the moment, you'll have to see it as a whole. We cannot just put it into certain pockets that there is violence here and not violence here. There is harmony in this part and not in the other part, because what you have to see is the representative picture. Like Varghese said, the government got 37% of the vote, but it stands for all Indians. Narendra Modi is the Prime Minister for all of us, irrespective whether we are from Tamil Nadu or Delhi or whatever religion or region. It's the same thing where what we see with hatred. We might feel insulated sitting here in Chennai or in certain other parts, but in many other parts it's a lived reality, as Revati found in Gujarat and I found in Delhi and certain other parts. So to just limit it to certain pockets or to certain segments, I think will be an anomaly.
I want to add to that. Let's break this down into something very simple and beyond just Hindutva and North and South. When you ask someone a question, where are you really from? What are you asking them? Where, no, you might be asking them that, but I get asked this question, and when I say Delhi, there's still a question mark. What does it mean? Doesn't mean anything. What they want to know is, what is your religion and caste and region? And I'm not saying these are not valid questions, but when this becomes something that can allow us to pivot into, oh well, I wear linen, I don't wear plastic, I don't do this. We are also using and theming people all the time. Mobility is always about us and them. It's a part of the matrix whether you have a saffron bunting here or not. The signpost may not be there, but the questions are very much there. Religion is, religious fundamentalism is broken up into caste parts. Even in UP, where I currently live and work and set up a foundation to work on social justice, there are people who may have gone to Ayodhya or may have sent rice because every single household and every single village was asked. Now, do you want to defy the order? So maybe you might do it out of fear, maybe you might do it because you like Lord Ram, and there's nothing wrong with liking Lord Ram. You may not remember the prehistory of the destruction of the mosque, you may not care about that. You may also feel that it gives your particular caste something. It may give your village something, and that may not necessarily equal to Hindutva in the way that the narrative is drawn up at the top. But all these parts make it a very complex whole, and we can see just if you get out of Chennai and get out of Kerala and you go into a Mercedes-Benz building in Pune, and you'll hear the doorbell ring and there are people saying, in the foyer today we're celebrating 22nd Jan in this way. Now if you say no, what are you excluding yourself from, and can you afford to exclude yourself? I saw many people putting out Facebook posts saying, I will no longer support such and such actor because they went there.
I will interrupt you there and bring in, yeah.
All linked responses, but I would just add an angle on it, that the question you raise has a certain clear answer, but also there is a fuzzy part which I think is grounds for optimism. I'll put it this way. The glass is half full and half empty. One of my old generation teachers once said, India is a land only of minorities. My village, my neighborhood, my this can get smaller and smaller and smaller. So there are 500 million minorities in India. So the laborious business is to create a majority. The sober fact is Prime Minister Modi and his party have done so. And anybody whose head is not in the sand will say, you know, it's very likely that he'll win in 2024. The only question is the number of seats. I have talked to experts right, left and center, looking under the ground, above the ground, but people seem to conclude he's done something there which he has achieved. But good news. So I do think it's not just a partial or statistical phenomenon. I think he's grabbed something. The good news is that is always temporary. This is a land of everybody is pulling towards a minor status. Caste remains. And where is the General Secretariat of Caste? Zero. It is a cellular system. It carries on 1500 years with no central management. It is continuing today, maybe in slightly different forms. It's political, it's this, it's that. But that means the pull towards smaller units is powerful. It's not just a post-Zealand-Harris breakup of India, panic. What breakup? It's always small. National consensus is very fragile. Majority is very fragile. So good news is the reign of some kind of coordinated minorities, the kind I think the Revati is also talking about, there is always room for that. Even if today and in the 2024 election, it looks very bleak. But the grounds for that majority are, I would say, somewhat unstable in India in the long view.
Well, I think we are, so we'll take 1-2 questions we will very quickly take, and then answers can be combined. Yes, ma'am, here.
Question for maybe everybody on the panel. And Revati had made this great point about how people, when she spoke about the first person in her book, how people can move from one position to another, a change of heart is absolutely possible and entirely possible, and perhaps we disregard that. And maybe that's also what Arjun Appadurai was just talking about. But the question I have is, are there the way in which we conduct public debate, the terms in which we set the debate, here is the secular person, here is the Sanghi person on the other side, here is the liberal person on this side. Are the terms of our debate itself, in a sense, forcing people into these categories once again? Is there a way in which we can have conversations without, say, name calling, and without social media and its hysteria being the primary means to mediate these conversations, so that we are not further locking people into positions about which they may have questions in the first place, right? So I'm just wondering if you
Any
also
other
share
question?
those.
That, okay, can we have the mic? Yeah, sir. Okay, then we'll take two, but very quickly, sir. 30 seconds. Yeah.
The question is to Dr. Arjun Appadurai. Would it be fair to say that the only way to eliminate the fault lines of faith is to eliminate faith?
To eliminate faith itself. To eliminate the fault lines of faith is, only solution is to eliminate faith itself. Yeah, so on this side, the mic, can you just take the mic? This is the last question. Yep.
So my question is an extension of what is being asked. I mean, if we segregate it before 2014 and after 2014. Yeah, sorry. So if we segregate it before 2014 and after 2014, I was a kid when it was 2014, and I saw a wide bandwidth of people who stayed in the middle way. Like, as she said, now it looks like, you know, the only way we could survive is either to be a Sanghi or an anti-Sanghi. But a few years back...
Can you conclude? Yeah, question. Yeah.
Yes. A few years back, a neutral group was wide, and a lot of people were comfortable with that group. Can you say that middle bandwidth is no longer practically possible?
Yes, yes. Who would want to take the question? Ziya bhai.
Sir, neutrality is a privilege denied to our generation.
That is exactly my question, sir.
Okay. Revati, before Professor will have the final word.
I think answering your question and Kalpana's question, it's that dialogue, that middle ground, the elasticity only lies in uncertainty. Certainty breeds absolutism. Certainty breeds fanaticism. And if we can live with, I don't know, if our egos can be less fragile somehow, and we can get control of that and say, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. Can you tell me? Then we can go somewhere.
Yep. Professor.
So these are again vital questions, and I'll respond to yours, which is that there is a temptation, you're right, to already have roles, and your script is already there, secular or some other script already there. The trouble is, at the one extreme, you have to say something slightly absurd these days, I'm just human. Other people will say thank you and turn off the channel right away. The other one is to give a 1 hour set of adjectives. I am from Tanjavur, I am from a somewhat lower caste, that my father went, who cares? So the middle is hard to find, and meaning which is neither super particularistic, so nobody cares except maybe your mother and brother-in-law, or I am human and also nobody cares. So how do we go in the middle band? Middle band has to be not only fluid based on uncertainty, I don't know, but it also has to be contextual. So if you say, am I for or against triple talaq, you may have one identity. If you have some other issues, the trouble is we are given one choice only, like Adar. Are you secular or not? The answer depends. So therefore on faith, my feeling is I'm open to the market of faith. Let everybody be there, but don't tell me that's my only identity for all topics.
Thank you so much, Professor Appadurai, for that very wonderful note to conclude this session with. Rigidity is what we should resist, fluidity is what we should pursue. On that note, I do not want to actually try to summarize the debate. I would, on the other hand, invite you all to follow the works and books that our esteemed panelists have written over a very distinguished career. So on that note, we conclude. Thank you for being a wonderful audience. Thank you.
Thank you.